Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. So I want to talk about all of the things that I read in March. So I actually have a reading vlog that I posted in the middle of the month that has about 11 books in it that I talk more in depth. So if you are interested in my thoughts, make sure you check out this video. But I will do a quick recap of what I read in that video. I talked about Seventh Circle, which is the first book in the Hades series by Tate James. I ended up giving this 3 stars. I thought it was a little more serious, less sexy and fun than I was really expecting from the series. I also talked about Nothing But Blackened Teeth, which I gave 5 stars. This is a fantastic horror novella reminiscent of Ring with beautiful writing. I read The Windigo, which is a 1912 horror novella that I gave 1 star. Extreme racism and just very boring altogether. I read The Duchess Hunt, which I gave 4 out of 5 stars. This is the second book in the Once Upon a Dukedom series, which I have enjoyed so far. I liked this one a little bit more than I did the first one. It's about a woman who is a secretary. Her boss puts an advert out in the mail for a bride, and she's responsible for finding him a bride, but she's like also into him. I like this one a whole lot more than the first one. I love the angst that this series brings. My favorite things about the series, and I thought this was great. I talked about After the People Lights Have Gone Out, which I gave 4 stars. This is a horror anthology. I absolutely love Stephen Graham Jones. I think he's a fantastic horror author, and any horror story you could possibly want is probably in this anthology. I talked about the entire Court of Parval series. This was read for the Brianna Hill Backlist Read Along. You can watch this live if you are interested in my thoughts, but I gave the first one, which is an age gap romance, a 3 out of 5 stars. I gave the second one, which is a Enemies to Lovers, a 2 out of 5 stars, and I gave the third one, which is also Enemies to Lovers, 2 out of 5 stars. I reread House of Earth and Breath, which I kept my previous rating of 3 stars. I have a lot of issues with Sarah J. Maas's writing, and I don't think that they're things that are going to go away. They're seen in all of her series, but overall I did think this is a fun murder mystery set in a fantasy world, if not a little contrived and drawn out. And then I read I Want to Eat Your Pancreas, which I gave 4 out of 5 stars. This is a manga about a boy who finds a girl in his class's diary, and she is actually going to die because she has a pancreatic disease, but no one knows it but him and her family. And so they go around their town doing things that she wants to do before she dies. I did like this. The ending kind of bumped it down a star for me. This has a certain theme and a certain guideline for what you're pulling from the story, and I think the ending just did a disservice to the story, and it kind of opened my eyes to problems that I have in manga like this. Those are all of the things I talked about in that video, so make sure you check that out. But the first thing I read that I haven't talked about yet on my channel is The Madness of Lord Ian Mackenzie. So this is about Beth and Ian, and Beth in the beginning of the book is engaged to be married to a man that our hero Ian knows through their love of pottery, and Ian isn't really a huge fan of the guy. He thinks he's kind of slimy, and he feels this pull to Beth. So when he sees her at a theater on the arm of this man that he doesn't like, he pulls her aside and basically says, he's slimy, you need to get rid of him, and I think we should have an arranged marriage. Now, Ethan has autism. It's not expressly diagnosed in the book because they didn't really have diagnosis and understandings of things like that in this time period, and he was actually put in an insane asylum, a mental health facility at that time, cure him because they didn't really know how to handle things like autism in that time, and he comes away with a lot of trauma, and he sort of believes that he will never be able to love anybody. He thinks that he is broken and there is something wrong with him, but he feels this draw to Beth, and he feels this desire to comfort and protect her. He basically propositions her and says, I want to fuck you, but also, you're a lady, so in order for me to fuck you, we have to get married. And that's, his pull to the marriage is, he really wants to be with her, and he thinks that it's just because he's sexually attracted to her. But from the onset, he's very into her and just wants to, give her the best life and protection and love, etc., etc. I really like this. I gave it 4 stars. It's not my favorite historical romance, but I think it is very, very sweet. I think I would have liked a little bit more angst, but the couple overall is very intriguing, and I really liked Ian. So then I read Hood Feminism. This is a nonfiction book about the intersectionality in feminism and how white feminism ignore the intersectionalities and the different ways that feminism affects people's lives, why different things are a feminist issue, poverty, food insecurity, gun violence, etc., etc. I didn't write this. I do think it's a good introduction if you are unfamiliar with intersectional feminism, but it doesn't dive too deep into really any one subject. It kind of just says, here is why I think this is a feminist issue, and it moves on. I then listened to the audiobook of The Fear. If you have not watched any of my previous videos, or if you're not familiar, I am currently doing horror buddy reads with Tamika from Library of Tomes. This was actually one of our buddy reads. It is a horror novella about two women who are married, and this is set during the pandemic, and they move to this town in Texas, and in the beginning of the book, one of them is actually assaulted by a man. Him and like a group of friends are attacking them because they're two women. So this does deal with homophobia, and it also deals with the pandemic, and they don't know how the town that they live in is going to respond to them being two women that are living together. So you have the paranoia of being attacked and also the paranoia of the pandemic, and it just is very, very, very suffocating. I gave this 3 stars. It's written very well, but it's one of those books, like, it's almost hard to read, like it's almost hard to continue. I'm straight, so I didn't have to deal with the added anxiety of like knowing that this homophobia is something that I would have to deal with on a daily basis. I do know that that is something that would be hard to read if that is something that you deal with yourself, but that was kind of just a added layer that I recognize that other people deal with this, but something that I am very privileged in not having to deal with. So it was all just kind of this suffocating thing. So if you are interested in reading this, if it sounds like something that you would want to read, make sure you go in knowing your triggers and understanding that this feels incredibly real. It is a pandemic that we are still currently going through, and it is something that queer people will deal with a lot. I then read Acts of Desperation, and I gave this 4 out of 5 stars. This is a pretty interesting fiction story about a woman who is recounting her life in like kind of a diary format, the events around this one relationship that is incredibly toxic, and her toxic relationships with herself, with her family, with her friends, and just like the kind of person that she is. But it mostly centers around this relationship with this man that she meets like at an art gallery in the beginning of the book, and she quickly becomes obsessed. And I think there are a lot of aspects that could be very relatable, particularly for people that were raised a traditional feminine role in a relationship. A lot of like caretaking and sacrificing things with yourself to make the other person happy, to make the other person's life easier, but this like really ramps it up. It's touted as like an anti-romance, but I don't necessarily think that's not what I pulled from it. I didn't pull from it that relationships are bad. I pulled from it that toxic people are bad in toxic relationships. It was interesting to read about toxic people. That's something that I really enjoy, and like there's very little self-awareness on the part of the main character. So you're kind of just going through it not really knowing, like, is this something that she's really experiencing? Are these people around her actually as bad as they seem? Or is this her being a toxic person and seeing that in other people? So then I read Sea of Ruin, and I gave this 5 stars. I read this for the Dark Maidens book club that I co-host. You can check out the live show linked below if you're interested in my full in-depth thoughts, but I thought this was freaking fantastic. This is about Bennett, who is a female pirate, and in the beginning of the book, she receives a compass from her father that is supposed to detail a place where she can go to discover a treasure that he left for her. And so she goes on this adventure, but in this adventure she gets kidnapped by a pirate hunter, and this starts a polyamorous relationship between her husband, and another man. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's very, very, very dark. It is historical romance. So if you can deal with the hard triggers of this dark romance, like sexual assault repeatedly, abuse, a lot of stuff, I would definitely recommend. It's very hard to read. I think that the dark elements in the book are there for a reason. Sometimes with dark romance in particular, I find that the darkness is there for the shock value, not to further the character's growth in themselves or in a relationship. But I think that the darkness here really builds Bennett up into the person that she is at the end of the story and looking for love how she is at the end of the story. So I think it was absolutely fantastic. Pam Godwin is a beautiful writer with lyrical writing that isn't too purple, and it immediately sucks you in. It's very consumable. I read it in like one day. It was so good, and it's probably one of my all-time favorite. It is my favorite historical romance. It's probably one of my all-time favorite romances in general. So then I read some manga, and I don't generally rate the first manga volume in a series. So I read Kiss of a Rose, which is about a girl who wears a rose choker, and her dad told her that if she ever takes it off, something bad happens. In this first volume, she loses the choker. And again, I didn't rate that. And then I also read the first volume of The Demon Prince of Momochi House, and this is about a girl who inherits her ancestral home. When she goes there it's being like inhabited by some spiritual beings. And then I also read Orange Volume 2. This is an incredibly emotional, pretty short manga series about a group of friends who get letters from their future selves, trying to change the events that lead up to one of their friends committing suicide. I gave the second volume 4 stars. So then I read A Taste of Her Own Medicine, which I actually heard about from Brie in 11 Words. And this is a small town romance, wasn't generally my thing, but I absolutely loved this one. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. It is about a woman who has just freshly left a divorce with her ex-husband who has moved on, and she is kind of floundering around a little bit. She has always wanted a career and wanted her own business, but she had kids and all of that. And now that she is divorced, she is looking to get back into the workforce, and she takes an entrepreneurial class from the hero. The hero is about 20 years younger than her, and that is a huge anxiety for the heroine. The hero is someone who runs business courses. He has had his own businesses before, and he's sort of always been running from his problems. Every time something doesn't work out, a relationship ends badly or something like that, he runs away, but he is looking to settle down now. So he settles into his hometown, and he meets the heroine in their class, and he's immediately drawn to her. They have this very interesting first and second meeting where she is getting coffee before the class starts, and she is not necessarily talking smack, but they have some banter back and forth. And then when she realizes he's her professor, she's very embarrassed. And then they end up meeting again in a bar later, and he attempts to flirt with her, and it just does not go well. But they end up working together to grow her business, and their relationship is very, very cute. I think we did more work with the heroine in her life than we did with the hero and his problems, but I still think that he was very, very open, communicative with her. He didn't let any of her anxieties and fears about their age gap, her having kids, etc., he didn't let any of that get in the way of his feelings for her, and he was always there to show her that he would fit into her life and that he wants to give the relationship a try, and he was willing to work with her through whatever issues might arise. And I think that it was incredibly sweet. It's fantastic. The fact that it's a small town romance and very sweet, and I don't generally like those, speaks to the quality of it, I think, and I definitely would recommend. I'm very excited to get into the rest of the series. All of the sisters are into like potions and crystals. I think one of the sisters can read auras, one can like get feelings from people, so I'm very interested in reading the rest of the series. So next up I read The Devil, which is a very interesting duet. The conclusion could 100% make this a 1 star, but I don't want to get too deep into what this is about because it's definitely a roller coaster. There is a twist at the end that I will be shocked if you can figure it out, but this is basically about a girl. She has really bad agoraphobia, and several years ago, her mother passed away. So she lives with her stepfather, who has only been in her life like a couple of years, and he wants to become mayor of this town, so they have to keep their attraction kind of on the low. And she is messaging with him on like a dating app, but he won't acknowledge that it's him. In the past timeline, we're experiencing a relationship in a very crucial time in the hero's life. And it's wild. I'm very interested to see how the duet finishes, but I would recommend. It's very dark and there is excessive use of the F slur, but it's very interesting. Next up, I read Bad Boy Blues. This was on one of my 5-star anticipated lists. I have read 2 books by this author before. I read The Unrequited, which was one of my favorite romances of 2020, and then I also read Medicine Man, which I didn't really love. And so I went into this with high expectations. I thought it was a bully romance. I was incorrect, and I did end up giving this 4 stars. It does have some like bullying elements, or the hero who comes back to his hometown where his parents own a hotel, and like he was raised in this hotel, and the heroine is working at this hotel because she needs to save up some money. Her parents recently passed away and she wants to get their house back, and they had a very antagonistic relationship in high school. Him and all of his friends like kind of bullied her, and then now in the present they keep running into each other, and there is definitely some like bullying aspects to this, but not as much as you would really expect from a bully romance. So if you are looking for some like light antagonism, I would definitely say check this out. The hero is dealing with a lot, and this more focuses on their similarities and the way that like even though they were raised very differently, the healing qualities that they give each other's lives and why they keep coming back together and clashing. So even though I didn't love this as much as I was expecting, I did really love the hero. He is dealing with dyslexia, and that is something that has kind of plagued him his entire life, and so he's put on this facade and had to lie about who he is because of his father and all that kind of stuff. He has a bad relationship with his father. It just is dealing with a lot of hard stuff. I will say, if you've read Saffron A. Kent, her heroines are all pretty much the same. They're all quirky, that wear Converse and have blue hair sort of vibe, and that's no different here, but I do think that their relationship is very good. And if you are looking for new adults, because they are like 3 or 4 years out of high school, bully-ish romance, I would say check this one out. I love Saffron A. Kent's writing. It doesn't matter what she writes. I always enjoy the writing aspect of it. It's just the stories themselves I sometimes don't like, but I did enjoy this one. So then I finally finished House of Sky and Breath. This took me almost 10 days to read, which is just outrageous, and I ended up giving this 4 stars. So this is the second book in the Crescent City series, so obviously I'm not going to go too in-depth into the story, but I will say that I had a lot of the same issues that I had with the first one. Mostly I think that having an 800-page murder mystery or mystery, even set in a fantasy world, just doesn't really work all that well. It makes it so that when you get to solve the mystery, it's like you don't remember all of the components, and every single time I would pick this book up, I enjoyed myself, but I would always find something to distract me, and the drive to pick it back up was never really there. So it was fun while it was happening, but it just didn't really feel imperative, important, exciting to read. What really salvaged it for me was the ending. I do think that the ending was impressive, and it was really where her vision for the series took place. Like, you could really see how much effort she put into building this world and how much foresight she has into what she wants to do with the rest of the series. So I was impressed by the ending, but all of those issues that I had with her other books and with the first one in the series still persisted, but I am excited to read the next one and see where the series goes. So then I read It Ends With Us, and this was my first Colleen Hoover, and I don't know if it was like my bad, because I thought this was a romance, and it's not. It's more just a fiction story with a light romance subplot about a woman who enters into an abusive relationship. I did see some people say that they feel like this book romanticizes abuse, which I just 100% don't agree with. If you finish the book, you'll understand. Also, if you read the book, like if you pay attention at all to the book, she's 100% not romanticizing their relationship. The woman is just in an abusive relationship and she's going through the ups and downs of the abuse. So it's kind of confusing why people say that. It just leads me to believe that they don't pay any attention. I did end up giving this 3 stars. Like I said, I was expecting this to be a romance, which it's not, so like that kind of is my bad for thinking that, but it also kind of disappointed me a little bit, and also I don't really like her writing. I have heard that her writing changes and grows over the years. I don't know when this book was written, but it just isn't really anything special to me, and I don't know if I would pick up another Colleen Hoover in the future. It would definitely have to be one that I know has strong romance ties or romance plots. I will say that if you are looking for a story very similar, with similar feelings and similar plots about a woman who gets into an abusive relationship, read Long Shot by Kennedy Ryan. This is very, very, very heavy. Obviously, if you're going in and you are at all triggered by the abuse in It Ends With Us, don't pick this book up. But if you wanted an Ends With Us story with a stronger romance at the end and better writing and just better everything in general, I would say pick up Long Shot. So then I listened to the audiobook for The Girl Next Door. This is a horror fictionalized story of the Sylvia Likens case, and I didn't know that going in. The Sylvia Likens case is a true case about a girl who was sold to this random stranger by her parents for like $100 a week in child support because they joined the circus, and this woman begins heavily abusing Sylvia. She has a sister who has cerebral palsy, I think, and she doesn't get quite as much abuse, but she is abused, and it ends with Sylvia being locked in a basement, heavily abused. They carve things into her stomach. I think they carved slut or something like that into her stomach. She is sexually assaulted a lot, and she ends up dying. And this is a fictionalized version from the point of view of one of the boys. This case involved a lot of like the neighborhood boys, and in particular, this book focuses very heavily on the abusive boys, but also how they are abused and how they don't really see that they're abused. And it's one boy in particular. Like I said, it is a fictionalized version, so there are differences from the real case, but I was familiar enough because I had seen the movie and I had read the nonfiction book that I was familiar enough with the case that once I started seeing the similarities, I knew like what was to come. I did end up giving this 3 stars. I will say that that's not like really a rating that I 100% agree with, or like I didn't know how to rate this because even though I knew the case, this book is very descriptive and very well written, and so reading it was incredibly uncomfortable. There were several times where I thought I was going to physically be sick, where I was going to throw up. Reading it was just this whole other experience, and it is written very well. I didn't know, I wanted to give it 1 star or DNF it at most points, but I also wanted to continue because it's very good. So I just didn't know where to land with my rating, but it is very hard to read. So I then listened to The Death of Jane Lawrence, which I gave 2 stars. So I thought this was going to be more horror than it was. So I thought that this was the story of a woman who gets married to a doctor. His one stipulation for their marriage is that she never goes to his ancestral home. And it is kind of that, but on their wedding day, having to go to his ancestral home, I thought he was a werewolf. I thought that was the big reveal, but it's not that, but it's like a haunted house, but not a haunted house, and it's about rituals and magic and just weird stuff. Necromancy, but not fun necromancy, and lots of talk about spirituality, and it just wasn't the vibe that I was going for. It's a horror nominee, so I get why people consider it horror. I don't agree with it being called a horror. I'm disappointed, gave it 2 stars. Still love the cover. I then listened to A House at the Bottom of the Lake. This is a very short horror novella. Well, you could argue the genre, but it's basically about 2 kids who go on a first date. They go kayaking and they like discover this tunnel that leads to another lake, and at the bottom of the lake there's a house, and they become like obsessed with the house. They don't know what it is. Like, it has like all the furniture, it has silverware, and it looks lived in. There's clothes in it, all that kind of stuff. Very interesting. I ended up giving it 3 stars. I don't know what the fuck that ending was. But it was an interesting listen. And then I listened to The Ballad of Black Tom. This is about Tom, who is just trying to make a living in Harlem to support himself and his father. And then he gets approached by a white man who tells him that he wants him to perform at his house for a party, and I'll give him like $200. And then he gets there, and it's like other people of color, and the guy is like trying to introduce them to like weird spiritual things and like opening doors to other worlds. It was very interesting, but I ended up giving it 3 stars. And then I read Promises and Pomegranates. This is a Hades and Persephone retelling, and I gave this 3 stars. It was very hot. I believed the sexual chemistry between the 2 characters. There is blood and knife play. There's also some public sex and some degradation. But outside of the sex, I didn't really understand their relationship. In the beginning of the book, the hero goes to the heroine's father and says, your daughter and I, had sex a couple of times, and someone got a video of it, and now they're like blackmailing us. So her and her father make a deal. They kill off her current fiance, and then they get married, the hero and the heroine. It just felt very one-dimensional, and I thought that they didn't really like make sense as characters. Again, outside of the bedroom, I don't really understand their relationship. The hero is supposed to be like this death god, like they keep calling him the god of death, and they keep talking about how no one fucks with him, but it just didn't really make any sense with like the personality that we saw. He had like this very toothless revenge plot against her parents, but nothing ever really came of it. There was no moves to get said revenge, and the heroine had absolutely nothing going on with her. Like, we know that she wanted to go to school, and then she just like drops out of school and she starts this garden, and like it just tried too hard to tie back to the original mythology without really making any cohesive sense, without doing any character work or having like a plot that went anywhere or did anything or built anything between them. And I just don't understand why they wanted to be together, besides the fact that they liked kinky sex and poetry. And then the last thing that I read in March was Near the Bone, and I ended up giving this 4 stars. This is the story of a woman who lives out in the middle of nowhere with her husband, and he is incredibly abusive. He tells her what to wear, how to eat, when to eat. He tells her that she can't leave, and if she does, she'll be punished, and her job is to listen to everything that he says. And one day she goes out to forage in their garden, and she discovers this rat that's like weirdly torn apart, and she's very afraid to tell her husband because she knows that he's very weary of other people. He doesn't want them to find out that he lives there or that they live there. She tells him anyway, and he is determined to find out what this beast is so that they can get rid of it and not draw other people's attention. And this starts the story of her trying to escape her husband and this monster, and it's very reminiscent of No Exit. If you like the tension and like the suffocation of No Exit, I think you'll really enjoy this one. It's very fast-paced. There's constantly something going on, and you don't know, like, is that noise the monster or her husband? Like, what's going on? And I definitely recommend for any fans of like survivalist, suffocating reads. Those are all of the books that I read in March. Let me know down in the comments your thoughts on anything that I read or what you read in March. I would love to know. Other than that, please consider subscribing if you haven't already. Thanks so much for watching, and I will catch you guys in my next